Okay. Right answers. What started the lost decades in Japan? A. Collapse of LDP, or B. Collapse of asset bubble, or end of Cold War? Most directly, B. Collapse of asset bubble. What are the main goals of electoral reform in mid-1990s? What's the main goal of electoral reform? That's C. Create the Westminster-style competitive two-party system. Electoral reform. So there was decentralization, try to strengthen local government, but that's not electoral reform. Circle the succession of prime ministers in chronological order. So Nagasone, Hosokawa, Koizumi, Abe, Hakayama. A. Who said the following? I will destroy the LDP. Jimito Bukwas. B. Koizumi. Which are the three major events which affected Japan between 2008 and 2011? Well, A. Lehman shock, 3/11 earthquake, and DPJ coming to power. The other ones happened before. Postal privatization happened in 2005, basically. Lost pension scandal. Is before that. And return of LDP under Abe happened in 2012, so it's A. Okay, what was lost, who lost them? Basically, you can go to the notes. I won't give you the answer direct here, but if you have 5 points of what was lost and who lost them, not just what was lost, but who lost them, I gave you points. If there was some kind of mistake, factual error, I underlined some of them and I subtracted a point. If you seem to be making the same point twice, like you're saying the same thing, like loss of confidence in different ways, you only got 1 point, although you may use 2 sentences. Why did DPJ succeed in gaining power in 2009? Well, all sorts of reasons. Pension scandal, loss of pensions, political Lehman shock, rising unemployment, rising inequality, loss of support in rural areas because of less money going to rural areas under LDP, general sense of dissatisfaction with LDP, unstable prime ministers, losing the upper house in 2007, an important reason why DPJ came to power, or LDP lost power. Okay, so if you had some of those, if you had 5 of those, if you had explained that each of them very carefully, I gave you 4 to 5 points. If you had some of the points, you get 3. If you had very few points, 1 or 2. Okay. So now you have 2 quizzes. I'm not sure we'll do 4. We might just do 3. 1 more, and then I will take the best 2 out of 3. Okay. So I'll take the best 2 quizzes, your best grades. If you missed one, then I'll just ignore that one and then just take 2 of them. And then I will calculate that so that it becomes 30% of your grade. Does that make sense? So 1 more pop quiz. And you all have the final paper instructions, right? If you came last week, you know. And if you had gone to Classes, you could download the instructions. And I'm being kind this time, so you can write in Japanese. 3,000 words. 3,000 jisu. Plus 400 word English. 500 words? 500 word English. Is it 400 words?
400.
400 English summary. So you summarize the whole paper. And as I said, please follow instructions very carefully. Please cite. Please show that you've read the book, you've listened to the lectures, and also done some outside research. Argue, don't just describe. And then, if you're very worried about whether you're doing the right thing, you can send it to me by the 17th of July as a first draft. And then I will grade and give you a kind of grade, which if you like, you can save that for your final grade, or you can rewrite it and get a better grade. Okay? Clear? So, don't worry too much about the pop quizzes. If you have 6 or 7, it's okay. I mean, a lot of people had 7 was average. So, even though you don't have 10 or 8 or 9, it won't kill you. But if you have under 5, you should start worrying. You should study a bit harder. Okay, one more thing, logistic or practical thing. We should do Hoko. Hoko is an extra class or replacement class because I missed 2 classes, right? And I'm thinking of doing it on July 18th, which is a Tuesday, right? Which is the day for Hokko, because there's no classes. Now, I know that you have other classes and you're very busy, so requirement is not mandatory. Attendance, you don't have to come to the Hokko, but it will be good if you come. I'm thinking of using this Hokko as either I do a lecture on Japan's relationship with the outside world, which isn't really central to this class because mostly it's domestic politics. But for those of you who are interested, or if there are not enough people to do a lecture, I can do a feedback session or sort of workshop for your paper. So you can come in with ideas or questions about your paper, and then you can come up to me and then I'll explain and answer. So depending on how many people come, if there are all these people come to the Hokko on 18th of July, and we'll figure out the time, then I'll do a lecture on Japan's Kokusai Kankei. So very simple, brief, for those interested. If there's maybe 10 people, 15 people, not so many people, I won't do a lecture, I'll just do a workshop to help you write your paper. So individual tutoring. You take turns and come up. We'll see. Now the time, July 18th, Wednesday. I'm thinking of doing it from 4:30. So 5限目. Is that 5限目? 5限目. The fifth period. How many of you first of all can make it on July 18th, 4:30?
Was it Wednesday or Tuesday?
Oh, sorry, Tuesday. Tuesday. Who can make it?
Can't make it.
You can. Who can make it? 4:30. Okay, you guys are. Everybody else is busy. It's not a holiday. Tuesday. It's a Hokko no hi.
But no other class.
No other classes, right? It's Hokko ireru hi. It's
Yes.
open for putting in extra class, replacement classes. So it's not mandatory, as I say, but I have to set it up. I should set it up. Okay? So let's put it this way. I'll set it at 4:30 on the 18th. And if you want to come, do come, I recommend. And especially I think most likely there won't be so many people, so I will just make it so that I can help you with your papers. Okay? So come and bring your questions about your own final paper. All right? And maybe you have written a draft on the 17th. You send it to me on the 17th or before, then I can look at it and then I can give it back to you on the 18th. I'll try and correct as much as I can. And if you come, I can advise this and this and this on your paper. Is that clear? Yeah? 18th, 4:30. I will tell the Kyotsu Kamoku Jimu people that there will be a Hokko on the 18th of July, Tuesday, 4:30. As I said, it's not mandatory to come, but if you want to come and work on your paper. If suddenly all of you come, then I'll do a lecture. Clear? Yes? No? Well, if you didn't understand, raise your hand. Okay. Well, you can come up after class and ask me. So I will set the 18th, Tuesday, 4:30 to 6. So one Hokko class.
I have a question about quiz. Is it because we have finished the book, right?
Yeah.
Is it just the book, or you said you were going to send some articles?
Yeah. So next
So
step,
what's
thank
this?
you, that's good. So we finished the book. Now we're doing a number of classes, 5 classes in total, on different topics. And the theme that goes through the different topics, of course, is Japan's political economy, but we're going to look at different divisions or cleavages or conflicts in modern Japanese political economy. Today we're going to talk about the center and the rural areas, so cities and countryside, big city, center and local relations. Okay, that's one divide. That's very important in Japan. Important in other countries too. Next week we're going to do something on youth and aging population. So that the generation divide between young people and old people. There's another very important divide. Okay? And then the following week we'll do something on women and the workplace. And women and men, the divide. Conflicts. Okay? And then we'll do a class on nationalism and the shift to right. So this will be a divide about, I don't know, people who are more open and closed, maybe, liberal attitudes and more nationalistic attitudes. It's kind of a dividing point. And then the final class will be talking about the state, the government versus the individual, and individual civil liberties. So a question about the change in constitution, question about freedom of press, freedom of expression, questions about state power as opposed to individual rights. So the 5 classes. All of them will have articles linked to them. Last week I uploaded articles. Did you get them?
Which folder was it?
It was just the individual, it should have been a Word file. Was there a Word file uploaded?
I didn't.
No? You didn't see it? Okay, well I might have forgotten. I'm sorry.
Because I've seen the final paper related
Yeah.
folder, but I didn't see
There was no other file.
So I didn't see it.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry if you had missed it, you can go back to it. But basically, there'll be a file with links to articles, or there'll be a file that has the actual articles on this whatever topic. So last week I was supposed to have sent you. I thought I sent you articles on decentralization, central-local relationship. Okay. Next week I'll send you articles about demographics and the problem of aging and youth participation in politics and these kind of divisions.
In the quiz, we'll be responsible from all the topics that we have covered.
Yeah, the final quiz the last quiz will be whatever we've done up to then.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly now the new topics. I won't take from the book, now we've done the book. Okay? So it'll be about local center relations, decentralization, or it will be about women in the workplace, or it will be about youth and aging, depending on when I do the quiz. Probably the quiz will be in middle of July sometime. Probably. Okay? Yeah? I think it's pretty clear, straightforward. Okay, any questions? Any more questions? Good. So now we're going to go to today's topic, which is this, center and local relations. Local is a very strange word. Everywhere is local. I mean, here is local, Kyoto is local, Omotesando is local, Nagatacho is local, if you're near there. But in this usage, it's talking about center and periphery. Periphery is the edge. Center is the middle of things. And specifically in Japan, we're talking about, well, mainly about Tokyo and the rest of Japan. Okay, Chuo Chiho. In terms of the center of politics and the center of economic activity, center of, I don't know, cultural creation and transmission. I could argue there's a lot of indicators that suggest this. And it's also a division between big cities and rural areas. New center and local. And of course, also it's used for central government and local government relations. So central government, national government versus prefectural government or local government. It's a broad usage. And this question about balance and conflict and cooperation between the central government and local governments, and also between big cities and outlying areas, is very important, not just in Japan, in many countries. Big countries, small countries, everywhere has a question of geography. The geographic dynamics. And in Japan particularly, I think even in the textbook and in the lectures, we highlighted the importance for the LDP, importance for Japan's global economy, this kind of relationship between central government and local communities, rural areas, how the LDP used money that it raised, tax money it raised from successful exporters, steel, and distributed across Japan, right? Through the form of public works, so-called pork barrels, and it created support for its political machine by redistributing this kind of dynamic of give and take. But if you look at it in a more broader question, what was happening in terms of the economic structure and the demographic structure between big cities, especially Tokyo and outside, it becomes very interesting. And although LDP was very successful, our post-war Japan was very successful in maintaining a kind of balance, at least in terms of providing jobs and providing some kind of redistribution of wealth, at least until the 90s. There have been always a problem of people leaving the rural areas and coming to the urban areas, in imbalance. And this has gotten actually quite accelerated, become worse since the 1990s. There have been different things tried, different kind of policy approaches taken to alleviate that, mainly decentralization. We'll talk about that. And I mean, in any country, UK, France, Germany, US particularly, even my own country, Sweden, there's always talk about what to do with the fact that everybody wants to live in the big city. All the jobs are in the big city. All the local communities are becoming depopulated. They're becoming poor. Opportunities are less. There's a divide. So when there's elections, there's always analysis based on the Rust Belt, or analysis based on the former mining belt areas, those places that have lost jobs, as opposed to big cities. The EU referendum, the Brexit, it was all the big cities basically supported staying in the EU, and outside was Brexit. So this kind of geographic differences in political attitudes, in circumstances, very, very important, very interesting. So we'll go into that. Okay. Economic and political relationship between center, national government capital, and local governments in rural areas. The main theme is that in the 1955 system, we discussed already, there was quite an effective way of balancing the divide and providing jobs and providing economic opportunity and redistributing. But this basically ends in the 90s, and inequalities start to become worse, and the situation of depopulation in rural areas accelerates, or aging in rural areas accelerates. Japan facing this serious issue, what to do. With overcrowding in Tokyo and undercrowding or underpopulation in rural areas, and growing inequality between these regions. The question, which I think comes out in the final paper, is how have Japan's regions, rural areas, outside of the big cities, have they benefited or have they been victims? Have they lost out more in this central local dynamic in the post-war period, ultimately? It seems on surface that they benefited a lot because the government spent lots of money building things, creating jobs in rural areas. But after, or in hindsight, when you look now, a lot of these areas are not being depopulated, and we have lost vigor. So there's a lot of talk about how to revitalize it. Then the next question is, how can we stop this problem of rural depopulation? How can we improve local and rural communities that have suffered depopulation and lack of pulling out of industries? It's a big theme. There's a lot of discussion about it in different ways, politically, economically, sociologically, and whatnot. Okay, so first we'll go into Japan's local government system, just to give you a brief overview. This is a map of Japan in the 1840s, 50s, I guess. Provinces of Tokugawa, Japan, and this is after 1889, the modern 47 prefectural system. Before modern Japan was created, Japan was divided into 300, 400 different domains, Han, with a Baku in the middle, and they're rather decentralized. There was some form of centralization, but it tended to be not as centralized as today. People had different dialects. There was, in the 1850s, people from Satsuma or whatever, they come to Edo, they don't understand what they're talking about because the language is so different. the basic, the native dialect. People had very, very, it was a very culturally diverse and decentralized in a sense. What happened, of course, was after the Meiji period, they merged these domains and they created 47 prefectures that we have now, a bit different from today, but basically the same structure. And it was very centralized, right? We may have talked about it a little bit in the it was centralized because in different ways. One of the ways it was centralized is the governors of the prefectures. They're not elected directly. They were sent as deputies from Tokyo, the Meiji government or the Tokyo central government. There are other ways that it was highly centralized. But after 1945, of course, the U.S. occupation, the U.S. MacArthur and SCAP, one of its reforms, democratization, one of the planks, important planks, was to focus on local government. The Americans in the U.S., local government is very important. It's sort of like their starting point, New England local democracy, town hall meetings. This was a sort of founding idea of democracy. And of course, the U.S. is a federal system where states have considerable power. And the U.S. authorities thought Japan was too centralized. Local governments need to be given more power and more independence and autonomy. And this will help Japan become more democratic, and it will prevent a return to militarism or a return to dictatorship. Why? Local governments can resist, theoretically. So they wanted local government to be a school of democracy. They established, as you all know, directly elected governors and mayors, and also directly elected local assemblies, which they had for certain prefectures and cities in the pre-war period, but after the post-war period, all municipalities and all prefectural governments have directly elected governor and mayor and directly elected assembly. So it's like a presidential system. This is kind of unique about Japan. At the national level, it's a parliamentary system. There's no president, right? There's no directly elected executive. Local level, there's a directly elected executive, directly elected ruler, or a leader, the governor and mayor. So kind of different system, national and local level. They also did various things to give more autonomy to local governments. They abolished the Homusho, Naimusho. They put the local government autonomy as part of the Constitution. It's one principle in the Constitution. They had things like directly elected local school boards, and locally controlled and funded police. Although these things changed. But in the beginning, in 1945, 46, 47, it was all about encouraging local government, local democracy. Well, soon after the Americans leave, or even before almost, local governments become increasingly dependent on the central government for its money, for its funding. One thing that the Americans didn't manage is to give enough taxing power to raise money locally. So local governments became very, very dependent on the national government for money, funding. The central government also started to assign a lot of obligation, duty, Hikainin Jimu is so called. So local governments had to do certain things, had to deliver certain services. They became kind of agents. They became shiten is what they call it, branch offices for the central government. The central government has all these policies it wants to deliver. It forces it onto the local government. So they have little choice in whether to deliver or not. A lot of national bureaucrats are appointed or sent to local government to control and manage and watch local government activity. A national police agency is created. They abolish prefecturally funded and controlled local government, local police, and they create a national overarching national police that controls the prefectural police. It's not so important. And they also use already early in the 50s and early 60s, they start doing all sorts of national projects, making dams or rivers or development projects, which the central government uses to encourage, to to encourage local economies, but also as a way to control local economic activity. Because they fund these big projects, local governments, they want this money, but they don't have the freedom to use the money in the way they want. It becomes quite centralized, at least administratively and financially, early on. We also know from the textbook, and we've already talked about it, the steel and rice dynamic. Somebody explain to me the steel and rice coalition again? From the textbook? Was it in the textbook? No, maybe not. Maybe in my lecture. You're smiling. Who's steel and who's rice? Steel are the big companies, the big exporting companies, the big heavy industry that makes things out of steel. Like what kind of company? Huh? What? Metal and steels, yeah, actually. But what can you make with metal and steel? Ships, cars, electronics, anyway, exporters. And rice, of course, represents the rural areas, farmers, right? And there was a coalition that is an exchange. What did steel provide? They provided, well, tax revenue for the government. They also provided funding for politicians, political donations. What did the farmers provide? Both. And also campaign help, mobilization, hands and feet to win elections. And the LDP managed this very nice kind of coalition, which they gave some things to steel. They helped regulate they gave favorable regulation and market control to the exporters, and then farmers, they gave lots of public works, right? Favorable legislation, this money was used to fund public works and transfers to unprofitable protected industry. So rural areas, they were not profitable, they are not competitive in the global market, but there's still a lot of people living in these areas, or quite a few, and they're all voters. So what do? Well, you provide them with jobs funded by the government in terms of creating dams and bridges, construction work, and also protection of rice or agricultural markets. They have very high tariffs, very expensive to import food from outside of Japan. This goes on to today too, even. So, I don't know, you go to Europe, you look at the price of cheese or milk and then butter, and you come back to Japan, the price of butter is 3 or 4 times more expensive. Well, part of it is, a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's very expensive to import. This is a political artifact. They do that because the farmers want to protect their markets from too much competition. In exchange, they support the government. Kind of an exchange. So this was going on. What else was going on? Systematically, what was going on in terms of government plans for the whole Japanese archipelago was there was a lot of major national level construction projects or development projects, so-called Zenkoku Sogo Kaiatsu, which started in 1962. There was 5. And the nominal goal is to balance growth. It's not good that it was argued that it's not enough that Tokyo and this Pacific belt, Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Osaka, Hiroshima, Kyushu, this was industrial, lots of factories located here. But the argument was that's not enough. We have to develop the northeast, and we have to develop the Sain, we have to develop Kyushu, Shikoku, all these areas. So what to do? The government said, well, we're going to build dams, we're going to build highways, we're going to build all kinds of infrastructure, airports, we're going to build harbors. And this was massive, massive amounts of money piled into this. And this helped, of course, create jobs. It also helped to reduce the inequality in development across the country very effectively. It also created lots of concrete all over Japan, as we know. We saw this slide? Maybe. These are tetrapods, and almost all of 60-70% of Japan's ocean shoreline covered with these tetrapods. And even the riverbeds, inside the rivers. There's a movement trying to get rid of these, but this is also a political outcome. Of course, the argument is it's important to have this to protect Japan's ocean sea line from being eroded. But You don't see this anywhere else but Japan, or hardly, and not at this scale. And this is because each of these represents, I don't know, several million yen, gives money to the concrete industry. You have to hire a lot of people to put them into the water, hire people to build these golang, whatever. It's a political kind of treat to rural areas, create jobs. And of course, roads and bridges to nowhere that we often joke about. Very fancy, very, very high-spec superhighways in the mountains, but only foxes and bears are using it. Right? It's very famous in Japan, and it's a problem. It's a lot of tax money. But if you think of it as a way of creating jobs for the local area, as a way of, I don't know, spreading wealth around, it's one way of doing it. Of course, it wasn't just construction projects. One could argue that the creation of nuclear power plants, airports, harbors, major public works, a lot of times, of course, there was a national agenda, you need the energy, but also it was something to do with local central relations. Many of these areas are the poorest areas in Japan, or used to be the poorest areas, and the local communities were very happy to receive it in the beginning. Although there's some opposition, you're happy to have a nuclear power plant in your the majority were happy in your community. Why? Because it generates a lot of tax revenue for the local community. Creates some jobs. So actually, until some number of major accidents, of course, until 2011 March, there were not so much hostility towards power. Well, bases are a bit different. Let's leave this aside. Okay, so there was an attempt to make this, spread money around, build projects, and make sure that there's some kind of economic activity. Because it's very difficult to make lots of money just by farming. And most of the industries, as the economy modernizes, it becomes more and more centralized. The service industry becomes centralized in major cities, and industries tend to concentrate in certain areas. Outlying areas have to be taken care of, and there was a political solution by redistributing wealth. Despite this attempt to spread money and to make sure there are jobs in the countryside, they couldn't really stop. The Japanese government couldn't stop continued population growth into Tokyo. And, until about the 80s, Osaka and Nagoya also increased. This is a photo, of course, of Tokyo. I think this is Ryogoku, Sumo. This is Uedo Hakubutsukan, I think. Must be Sumidagawa. Anyhow, if you go to Tokyo, which you should go up a building and look around, because there are very few cities, at least that I know of, which has such concrete and glass sprawled all the way where eyes can see. If you go up a high building in New York, or if you go up a high building, I don't know, in Shanghai even, I think you can see a little bit of non-built up areas. In Tokyo, it's just miles and miles of built up. Okay, and you can see this by statistics. You can see, obviously, concentration of people per square kilometer, 3,000 to 6,000 people per square kilometer in Tokyo, and then in Hokkaido and Iwate. No, is this Iwate? Aomori, must be Iwate. It's about 1/10 concentration of people. So there's this big gap. Osaka is quite concentrated as well, but not. Osaka is about 8 million people. Tokyo and its environs about 25, 26 million people. So depending on how you measure. Very, very big cities. Okay. And you can see that it's not just population. Tokyo metropolitan area has 3.6% of Japan's land, but it has about 30% of the population, 30% of GDP, or even more if you calculate by headquarters. The headquarters of companies, 64%, bank savings, information service, so information sector, sales, advertisement industry sales, number of university students, highly concentrated. Highly concentrated. I had some data comparing the concentration of population and economy comparatively in the capitals of each country. And to have 30% of the population and 40% of the economy, 31% of GDP in the capital is very high, even compared to, say, New York or Washington, D.C., or if you compare with Paris in France or Stockholm, Sweden, I don't know. It's very high. I'm sorry, I should have written down figures. I can show them to you if you're interested. Tokyo is, of course, a lot of countries have high concentration in their capital, but in Japan, it's very, very concentrated. And it has been accelerating. They don't, other centers, major urban centers in Japan, still not comparable to in other countries. Okay, so there's been this overconcentration. So there's this question: what to do? There are people in rural areas are feeling like people are all leaving to Tokyo, and those in Tokyo are complaining about it being too crowded, and all kinds of related problems of overcrowding, obviously, quality of life issues. Having very crowded places reduces fertility rate. You'll have less babies if you live in a very highly crowded place. So anyhow, all kinds of issues. So there's been a question about decentralization. And it has been going on for some time, this problem, Kaso and Kamitsu. How to balance, not just redistributing wealth, but how to balance so that people will decide to live and continue to live in rural areas. What to do. And avoid coming to Tokyo, right? So there's been this discussion about decentralization, what to do with rural depopulation, urban overpopulation. There's also a lot of criticism and questions about local governments being inefficient and wasteful. They're not doing their job well enough. And partly because the central government is so powerful that local governments don't really take initiative, and they don't spend money wisely because they know the central government will help them out eventually. And then you turn the coin, flip side, there was a lot of arguments in the 80s and earlier that the central government has too much work. They're overburdened. They have to deal with so many of these local government issues. They can't focus on the big important issues like trade or foreign policy, security. Right? Central governments and central government bureaucracies are so involved in how to spend and how to control local government activity. So we need to reduce the work of the central government so they can focus more important. Then from below, some demands for more local democracy, that is, local residents saying that because local governments don't have enough power, don't have enough money, people are not interested in local government, so the local democracy is not very energized. We need to decentralize, give local governments more power, more money, then people participate more in local government, local democracy will become more, will improve. And I think in the 80s, an important trend was that there was a lot of pressure to reduce government, so-called neoliberalism, which basically means less government, more private sector, more market solutions. Neoliberalism argues that the state, the public sector, government activity is inefficient and it's expensive. It's much more effective if you have free market companies, private companies delivering services. So reduce tax, reduce government spending. This was a very big pressure in the 80s and 90s, and even today I think it continues. And so the argument was, let's cut down the size of the central government. Let local communities do it themselves. Let's stop helping all these local communities. So we had decentralization trends in Japan, again, against the backdrop of overpopulation in Tokyo and under efficiency, low efficiency, so supposedly low efficiency of local governments, rural areas. Started out in the 90s, early 90s, serious reforms, so-called Chihou Bunken, different parties, Bunken Kakume, Chihou Sosei, they all change shape and change name, but essentially the idea is let's improve the balance between the center and locality by giving local governments and local communities more power, so that they can invent and be creative, and they can create new sustainable industries and compete with each other, and they will be more attractive for people to come and live in these rural areas or local areas. That's the idea. Has it worked? That's another question. You had, if we go through the major reforms between 1989 and 2006, you had major reforms. You had administrative decentralization, which made central and local governments equal and reduced responsibilities to our local governments, duties, give them more freedom. We also had municipal mergers. What does that mean? Well, up to about 1999, there were about 3,000 cities, towns, and villages in Japan. 3,000. Now, how many cities, towns, and villages are there? It's about a third, 950,000. It's become very much shrunk. They reduced the number of cities and towns and villages by putting them together. So you have 2 towns, or 2 towns and 1 village. 2 cities became 1 with a new name. Of course, they fought a lot about the name. Sometimes it was the bigger town's name they left, or sometimes they created a new name. It's a very, very difficult process, but this was part of decentralization. Why? Why wouldn't you want to make bigger towns and cities if you want to decentralize? What's the point of doing that? Yes.
A big town is more services. So to prevent people to move from a rural area where you don't have housing
The big town has more
services.
services, yeah. Or they're bigger, so theoretically they can provide more services, or they have more money, or they have more personnel. And then you can reduce the inefficiency of having 3 fire departments, or 3 garbage collection companies, or 3 schools. If you have 1 big school or 1 big fire department, it's cheaper. That's the idea. And then fiscal decentralization is fiscal means government money and government spending. The idea was to give more taxing power to local governments so they can raise their own taxes and free them to raise debt, local governments, and to spend it in the way they want to. Until now, a lot of the money that local governments spent, it was controlled by central government because there were subsidies. Okay? Of course, there's this thing called Chiyokoze, where they received money without any strings attached. You can spend it on anything. But because the government had all these requirements, federal government had requirements of what to do. You have to have local schools. You have to have local hospitals. You have to have these and these things. So central government requirements made that local governments had to spend on certain things. So the amount of money that they could spend freely, very limited. The idea of fiscal decentralization is to increase discretionary money that they could spend free. These things happen essentially under Koizumi, this part, and this happened Mori and before Shimofuta. Okay. And if the decentralization Chiyogunken was sold as this super medicine, as a super solution to all the problems of Japan. The so-called panacea. Panacea is a cure-all, cures everything. What's it going to do? Well, it's going to have all these great effects. National government is going to be free to focus on important national issues. It's going to reduce the waste, administrative waste, caused by having all these local governments, which are small and inefficient, by joining them together, making them compete with each other, making them become more creative about how to spend money. And also, because they're responsible for their own money, they're not going to waste it. Generate more policy making, more reflective to local preference, which means now local communities will have the power to tailor, to change policy to match their local needs. Until now, the central government decide for all municipalities. Well, not decide, but make a general standard. And the local communities and local governments have to implement that. But now, if you have a specific community with specific needs, circumstances, you can adjust the policy because they're free to do that. This is more about competition. Local governments are going to compete with each other. What are they going to compete for? How can local governments compete? What are they competing for? Or what do they want? Somebody. Tax revenues? Are they compete for tax revenues? How would you increase tax revenues if you're a local community? You can raise taxes.
They can compete to attract businesses.
To attract businesses, yes, very good. So to attract companies to come to their town or village or city or prefecture. So you create good circumstances. I know you create infrastructure, or you lower taxes, or you lower regulations, and you get people, companies to come. What else will local governments compete over? Attract businesses, attract residents, attract people to come and live. This is, if you take the subway in Tokyo, you see all these like ads saying, please come and live in this rural village, whatever. We have very good nature, very clean. And if you come and live here for 5 years, we'll give you a house for free. And we'll pay you kyakuman. They have these things going on because they want people to come and live there. Why? Well, if you're depopulating, you need young people, otherwise the town, village will disappear. But more than that, local communities get money from the central government depending on how many people are in their town, village. So if your municipality has 100,000 people, then the central government calculates, oh, you have 100,000 people, so we give you this much money, basic grant. So if you increase the number of people, that get some more money. That's competing. And finally, of course, as I said, local democracy, that is, if local government is more important and more accountable and the decisions taken locally are serious, then people will pay more attention and they will participate and check their politicians. Local democracy will improve. That's the theory. Did it really deliver? Did decentralization deliver? Well, I won't go into so much detail, but the problem was that even if local governments gained a lot of, in theory, powers and discretion, local governments didn't really innovate as much. Most of them didn't innovate. Most of them didn't use that discretion. And even though there was a general push for decentralization, during that process, a lot of the central government ministries resisted. They were teikosei. They did not want to give power to local governments. Why? Well, it's natural. If you're a central government ministry, you have power, you have budget. To give that away, it reduces the scope of your ministry. So there's a lot of resistance. So there are a lot of ways in which decentralization was sabotaged. Basically, people say it's incomplete reform. In terms of municipal merger and fiscal decentralization, there was a lot of criticism saying from especially smaller towns and villages that didn't want to merge. They wanted to keep their name. They wanted to stay the same size, or not the same size, but to continue the tradition of their village. But suddenly they were told by central government, if you don't merge, we're going to cut your funding. Essentially, that was the argument. So they were forced into mergers with bigger cities or bigger towns. They're sort of sucked in, and they lose their identity, and they lose, public services become centralized in the bigger city area. In these places in the periphery, they lose maybe their school, or they lose a hospital, they lose municipal offices. Some merged municipalities, they saw public services declining. Fiscal decentralization is one of the more problematic decentralization, in that it wasn't, not only was it inadequate, what ended up happening was a lot of regions, although they gained power to raise more money, because their tax base, because their communities or their regions didn't have very many businesses to start out with, they couldn't really raise much money. So they lost compared to pre-decentralization periods. They lost their funding. They had limited gains. Actually, they had negative gains in terms of available money. So it also resulted in disparity, greater inequality in the fiscal strength of local governments across Japan. Some of the bigger cities like Tokyo and Nagoya, Osaka, they may have benefited from fiscal decentralization. They have more money to tax, they have more businesses to tax, more people there, so their incomes went up a little bit. Other areas, less income. So in 2003 to 2006, when this happened, a lot of rural areas, rural communities, and prefectures, they lost a lot of money. What happens? You can't fund public services. So there was this criticism, especially from weaker communities, that they're abandoning the regions, Chihoki State. Unfortunately. It was a very difficult balance to provide independence and autonomy, but also to make sure there is not too much inequality. You can't really have both. If you decentralize, there's always going to be inequality. That's the idea of decentralization. Communities get their own taxing power, they get their own independence, but there's a risk that they may lose out in the competition. So it was not the decentralization reforms was not very well received. There was a lot of hope for change. There was a lot of hope that it will make Japan revitalized, that Tokyo will not be so concentrated, people will go and live in different thriving parts of the country. Overall, I'm being a bit pessimistic. I usually am very pessimistic in this class, but overall, it wasn't very well received. Okay. And some of the data to show you that the situation for rural Japan or central-local relations has not really improved. It's gotten worse since decentralization. I'll give you some data. Well, this is public works spending, which was the main way in which you can see public works. This is the green. Continued decline of public works related spending from around 2000. And then continued spending, this is the spending on health care and old age care and pensions, so social security spending. That's a general trend. So essentially, rural areas, they've lost a lot of the active economic funds from central government, that is, money that can create jobs. Instead, what money is being spent on taking care of the old elderly and pensions. So there are a lot of old people in the rural areas. There's much more aging population in rural areas than in cities. They, of course, get funding from the central government, but in terms of creating new jobs and create a new dynamic, you see that it's being spent mostly on social security, pensions, and healthcare. Less on public works. I'm not saying that it's good. It's the only solution to float rural communities and economies is public spending on construction, public construction, or crowd works. But it's clear when you see this that this trend is continuing, and of course this hurts a lot of regional economies where the only thing that they had was either farming or construction related. You see a disparity in tax revenues. This is from 2006. A bit old, but Tokyo, Kyoto, and the other prefectures, income per the prefectural tax revenue is double in Tokyo, whereas still Japan is almost half or even less. This is how self-sufficient prefectures are in terms of the amount of tax money it receives. And it's only Japan, it's only Tokyo that's basically self-sufficient. The other places, they receive more from government funding, and this darker color is local taxes. Then you have all these disparities in public services. I won't go into them so detail, but basically, because some local governments, local communities have more tax money, and more funds, you can spend more on services. Services like healthcare. Depending on where you live in Japan, depending on the local government, the cost of accessing hospital care, the opportunities to get healthcare, there's a divergence. Okay? The cost of paying for national health insurance can be quite different depending on where you live. The premium insurance to be taken care of. Sometimes as much as 3 times the difference. Okay? Iruma versus Nemo, I don't know. Iruma is somewhere. No, I don't know why that's the case, but there's a divergence. Depending on where you live, how much money you pay on average for your health insurance diverges. Old age care too. Depending on the size of your city or how wealthy it is, you may get some special discounts or exemptions for paying for old age care. Where essentially the big cities offer more exemptions. If you live in small cities, you don't get exemption. Exemption means discount for how much you have to pay for old age care. Child care services, this is a very big problem. Depending on where you live, your opportunity, your chance to be able to put your children in a hoikuen, nursery, will differ. If you're in central Tokyo or eastern Tokyo, or if you're in Kyoto or Osaka, there's a major problem of not enough hoikuen, not enough nurseries. But if you live in the countryside, I don't know, somewhere in Toyama-ken or something, the chance that you can put your children in a hoikuen is much higher. There's not that gap. So this is once again difference in services, public services, depending on where you live. In England, it's called a postcode lottery. Postcode is what? Yubin bango. Lottery is not bakuchi, but what's lottery in Japanese? Lottery, takaguchi. So yubin bango takaguchi. Depending on what your postcode is, you get a very good service, or you get very bad service, or you get no service at all. Is this a good thing for a country? If you accept decentralization, then you have to accept some of it. Education costs, right, depending on where you live, whether you get extra funding or money from your local government to pay for, I don't know, junior high school or high school. Some municipalities, some prefectures, like Osaka, you don't have to pay for high school, public high school. Right? It's totally free. In Tokyo, they're trying to do that. But in many places, you have to pay some money to go to public high school or junior high school. Okay. Right, so this is another problem you have to think about. If you're going to have decentralization, you're going to have some of this problem of unequal services. Okay, this is in terms of regional income disparity, so how much difference there is depending on where you live in terms of how much money you make. Okay? Actually, you can see this is 1955, this is 2005. It's actually come down quite a lot. So the 55 system, the LDP, redistributing money through making all these construction, protecting rural areas, it had a very good effect in terms of making sure that income is equal, generally speaking. And if you look at the international comparisons, OECD, Japan had one of the lowest inequality in terms of regional income disparity. But the problem is it has started to increase again. But it increased up to the bubble period, bubble collapsed and it fell. But it started to pick up. Actually, it's gone up even more, 2016, 17. So this is a problem in terms of, this is a Gini coefficient. Inequality across how much money you make, depending on which region you're in. This is average income differences. The average incomes in different prefectures. Obviously, Nagoya, Aichi, Osaka, very high, above 5 million yen. And then if you go to southern Kyushu, is the lowest, obviously. it's lower, 3.5 million. So 1.5 times difference in income. This is median. Anyway, you get the picture. Another problem has been immigration to urban areas. This shows the number of people who are moving to Tokyo, Kansai, Nagoya. Okay? And this is net. Above here is net population increase. This is net population decrease. And from the 50s to about the 70s, 80s, is rural areas outside of these three, Tokyo, Kansai, and Nagoya area, people have been leaving, obviously. More people coming into the city. It slowed down in the mid-80s and then increased up to the bubble period. And it's slowly come down again in the 90s, mid-90s. But increases into Tokyo have started to accelerate again. Sorry, this is a bit old. And it continues. So Tokyo inflow of population, I think last year, it's probably 2015, there's about 100,000 people coming into Tokyo net. Students who come to university in Tokyo, people who come here to Tokyo for work. There are very few other places that show net population increase. Osaka, I think, is kind of flat. Shiga Prefecture, there's a bit of an increase. Everybody wants to live in Shiga, apparently, because it's close to Kyoto and Osaka and it's cheaper. Okay, so you can see that there's been net migration, which continues even after decentralization. You see this problem. All the jobs, all opportunities are in Tokyo and Nagoya. And the estimate is that it will continue. People continue to go and live in Tokyo. You have to think about it. What's that going to do to Japan's politics? If almost 80% of the people live in big cities, what are these rural areas going to be? How are they going to be represented? You have to change that process. A lot of things you have to think about. But just quick comparative note, it's not just Japan. All over the world, you're seeing a very sharp increase in urbanization. I think in terms of the world population, there are more people living in cities than in the countryside now. And it will continue. And estimates say by 2015, the world is, 70% of the people will live in cities. That's a big deal because in human history, long span, most people lived in the countryside. Now it's flipped over. So all these ideas we have about all these ideas we have about culture and all these things have been flipped over in the last 100 years. Cities are going to be the main source of things. Okay, one more point is that it's an additional problem with overcrowding in Tokyo is that most people who go and live in Tokyo don't make babies or don't make enough babies. Tokyo has the highest rate of increasing population they're sucking in from the outside, but it has the lowest fertility rates. Okay, that is the average number of babies that a woman will make between the age of 15 to 45 through a lifetime. If you calculate, it's lowest, one of the lowest in Tokyo. Yeah. National average for I should say it's 1.41. Tokyo is 1.02. Okinawa 1.9. I think Toyama, Shimane, Miyazaki, Nagoshima is high, 1.7. So this has made people say, oh, Tokyo is a black hole. Why is it a black hole? It sucks in people, and then no more people are being made. They disappear. Tokyo is very attractive. There are a lot of business opportunities. There's a lot of excitement there. But they don't make children. Why? Why don't people make children in Tokyo? Well, they do, but why do you think its fertility rate is lower in Tokyo than in the countryside? Yeah.
Because working woman population is higher.
Yeah, there are more women working in Tokyo probably, so both the man and woman works,
and things are expensive.
Things are very expensive. Land is expensive, so it's very hard to find space for children, perhaps. Other things? I already mentioned about hoikuen. What about hoikuen? Yeah.
Probably there are not many nurseries.
Yeah.
I'm hearing actually like lots of problems about like Tokyo people who are living in Tokyo cannot find any place to
Yes.
put their children. So they have
So
to.
it's very difficult to find nurseries in Tokyo. So that's why parents think, or couples think, oh, if we have children, what if we can't get them into a nursery? Then one of us has to quit our jobs. We don't want to do that. You've heard this news story last year where a mother couldn't get her, working mother couldn't get her child into a nursery. It's like almost a lottery. And what did she wrote this Twitter blog, or I don't know, she wrote this blog saying, Nihon shine. Very strong words, die Japan. She was very pissed off. She's very angry. Why can't I, that the government is saying, she's saying women should work and have children, make children because Japan is shrinking in population, but they don't provide the support, or not enough. And another problem with this is, for example, Yokohama-shi or Kanagawa, Yokohama City, advertised, they made a lot of effort to make sure nobody had, all mothers could put their children into a nursery. So they built lots of nurseries. And they announced it in the news. They said, oh, we have very low taikujido. So we have, most parents can put their children into nursery. What happened the next year? What do you think would happen if you advertise your city as having very low number of people who can't get into nurseries? Huh?
Everyone goes there.
Yeah, everybody wants to go there. Everybody wants to live in Yokohama. So you have the problem accelerates, or it starts again. It's I don't know. There's some term in macroeconomics, kind of negative selection or something. So it becomes a very difficult challenge to deal with this kind of problem just by local government level. Okay. Now, 2012 or 14, there was a big. Was that 2014? There was an article and a book called the Shihou Shoumetsu, which means vanishing rural areas. Basically, the argument was so many of the rural towns and villages, even cities in Japan, the population is shrinking so much that so many of them will disappear. 40%. Is it 40%? 50%? I don't know. Prediction that by 2040, about 50% of municipalities, so I lied, it was 1,900 or so municipalities after it was shrunk from 3,000. Anyhow, there are 1,900 municipalities now, and about 50% of them will disappear. Why? Because the number of women there who are childbearing, defined as 20 to 39, there's so few of them, and if there are not enough of such women, then obviously the village cannot self-replicate, so these places will vanish. That was their argument. And you can see these red areas are the ones where most risk at disappearing. And if you look, Shikoku, it seems like the whole island will disappear. Or Hokkaido, not disappear, but the municipalities will be depopulated. And they won't be able to self-create. They'll just become old people. No young couples, no childbearing mothers. Is that a big deal? I don't know. Everybody seems like, yeah, whatever. If you live in the city, it doesn't seem like a big deal. But if you are living actually in these small villages or towns, it's a very big concern. You start thinking, shall I sell my house now here? But it doesn't make any money. Shall I move to the big city? If the population shrinks and disappears, all the public services will disappear, right? Schools will disappear. So it's a negative spiral. Yeah. And another estimate is that by 2050, 20% of inhabited regions will be depopulated. So there'll be areas that will be no people living. Not just that the villages will be all full of old people and no childbearing mothers, but there'll be absolutely no people. Which, if you like nature, it's a great thing. Oh, finally, the people are disappearing and nature can return. So you hear news stories of bears and I don't know, deer and monkeys and animals you've never seen before in these areas appearing because the farmland is returning to nature. The wildlife is getting closer and closer to where people live because there are fewer and fewer people. So I guess if you're an environmentalist or a green person, it's a good news, maybe. Nature is recovering. Okay, we have 14 minutes. So these kind of things are happening, and the question is how do we deal with this? How is it a maybe it isn't a problem. Maybe it's okay that we all live in cities and then the outlying areas is just nature reserve. Possibly, although I don't want to see that kind of world. I think it's the balance between living in urban and rural areas important. Okay, another important trend, I think, of central-local relations is not the reality of how things are changing. Disparity in income, disparity in public services, disparity in population growth, but the perception. Okay, I think we talked about this. Perception is as important as reality in politics and anything. Okay, perception is as or more important than reality. You can ask what's reality, but perception about inequality, regional inequality, is quite low until about 2004. People didn't think that regional disparity is getting worse. Same number of people felt that it's getting better, central and local inequality, or regional disparity. But since about 2004-05, the number of people who are complaining or worried about inequality has surged. 10% to about 30%. It's come down. It started increasing again in 2015-16. I should have given you the newest figure. What does this mean? It means that more and more people think that it's a problem that rural areas are getting more depopulated and poor, and big cities are getting wealthy. So, even if you don't think it's a problem, about 30-40% of Japanese people do. まだ現在日本条件ですごい方向に向かっているものが船がついてありますが、この地域格差悪くなる。Okay, so what to do? Well, there have been different kinds of suggestions. Encourage population shift to rural areas by creating jobs and maintaining social services. 地方創生 plans, all kinds of 構造特区, 国家戦力特区, which is in the news recently, to deregulate certain areas and allow new industries to be created, service or education or whatever, some kind of industry, business, tourism. Deregulate just a certain area, and then this will trigger growth and create jobs, and people want to live there. Has it been working? No, not really. It's been very difficult to deregulate. There's been proposal for more decentralization, much more aggressive decentralization. One of them, which I'll mention later, is to get rid of the 47 prefectures, and then create doshu, to create states, like in the US, to have 10 to 12 biggish states. So 4 or 5 prefectures will become one big state. You have 10 to 12 states. Each of these states will be given much more power and much more responsibility, much more freedom. And then these states will compete. They'll become countries of their own almost. And this is supposed to trigger competition, encourage local initiative, attract businesses. Another idea is to focus on kind of a triage, since depopulation you can't stop, across Japan, rural areas disappearing can't stop. So just select a few key cities and then invest there, and let the surrounding areas die out, basically, and that focus on creating central cities that can die out, but central cities in which mini centralization in different parts of Japan. That's one idea. What else? I don't know. The rationalization, that's what the rationalization is. You consciously choose to stop supporting areas that you know cannot make it. As too few people, too little possibility, just old people. So you shut down these places and then you ask them to move to a bigger city nearby. Kind of very cruel for those people who live in these rural areas, but it's one policy. Increasing immigration, maybe, to work and settle in rural areas. Very, very tricky, very, very difficult. already you have international marriages, services in which foreign women, oftentimes from Southeast Asia or China, are invited to live and marry with a Japanese man from rural areas and to join farming household or whatever. Because so few Japanese women want to live in the countryside. Found enough women. I don't know. You hear in the news a lot of talk about young people who quit their job as working in the city and trying to make new communities outside of in rural areas and start new businesses and ventures. That exists and some are successful, but as an overall macro trend, more people are going to the city than those leaving to start up new stuff in rural areas. So I don't know what it is. It might be a mindset problem. I think the serious fear of not having enough services, access to education, access to healthcare is very difficult. You can't overcome those very easily. Okay. Shiho Sosei, Abe-san's plans in 2014 to tackle rural depopulation. So the focus is really not just about economic redistribution, creating jobs, but to focus squarely on how to make sure people stay and live and create babies in rural areas. All kinds of plans to set up funds that municipalities can use to attract residents and businesses. But unfortunately, the initiative has been criticized to start out with, and it's kind of, we don't talk about Shiho Sosei so much now. Another half-baked initiative, and it's very central driven and not very, how should I say, not enough is the argument. And of course, we know in the 1980s, there was this plan, kind of similar, a bit different, but kind of similar, to provide funding to local communities and saying, hey, you spend the money whatever way you want. Try to do something that will help your community, okay? And it's Furusato Sosei, it's called, not Shiho Sosei. And this was under Takeshi Noboru, and the government then provided, I think, 100 million yen to each municipality, and they could spend it whatever way they wanted. What happened? Well, they used to buy gold bars, golden toilet somewhere. Municipality built a golden toilet, big dragon statue, I don't know. All kinds of very wasteful spending. Shiho Sosei is supposed to be much more targeted to building jobs and attracting residents, supposedly, but it's very difficult to. If you're going to give money and freedom, you have to accept that there's going to be some bad ways of spending the money. The question is, what do you do with municipalities that mess up? You're going to let them go bankrupt? Can you let a municipality go bankrupt? Can you let a prefecture just go bankrupt? If not, then it's not really decentralization. You're sort of a controlled competition. You need to have failure and success. You have to provide both opportunities. Otherwise, it's not really decentralization. Anyhow, so that is the 1980s, Furusato Sosei. What about today, Shiho Sosei? Well, the news recently has talked about this animal hospital, animal medical veterinarian school, Chuigakko in Okayama, Kake Gakuin, which is a big scandal, right? And supposedly, Prime Minister Abe personally instructed the Ministry of Education to build this new school in this place. And why? Because his friend is there to provide this new school for create job funds favoring his particular friend. It's just a scandal, it's not proven. But this is linked to decentralization in a sense. It's top-down decision-making efforts to create new economic activity in a local area, in Okayama. It's linked to corruption in the center. So it's very difficult to get a balance of rational, scandal-free stimulation of the economy, I guess. Okay, this is Doshusei map. As I was saying, one of the very radical ideas is to get rid of 47 prefectures and make 10 to 12. So you have Hokkaido's 1, Tohoku State, Kita Kanto, Minami Kanto, Tokyo, Tokai, Kansai, Osaka Tokubetsu, Shikoku, Chugoku, Kyushu. So there are different suggestions. Is this going to happen? Probably not. For the foreseeable future, who will resist Doshusei? Who will resist abolishing 47 prefectures? Yes.
I think undeveloped places, like unpopulated, depopulated places will oppose because they will not. I mean, if the like central government leave them by their own, they will not. I don't know, have money, any
Yeah.
kind of revenue.
Well, if you are, for example, Kyushu becomes one state. Where will they put the capital of Kyushu state? Probably in Fukuoka. So if you're in Kagoshima, you lose the Kagoshima government, and you lose. So the outlying areas, maybe the central areas, will do very well in the state system. But there's nervous. You'll be worried if you're from Miyazaki or Kagoshima. What's going to happen? We're going to lose our own local government. We're going to lose our own governor. We're going to lose our own representatives, and it's going to be centralized in Fukuoka. That's a possibility. More directly, how about all the prefectural governors? What happens to them if you do Doshusei? What happens to all the governor?
Unemployment.
Unemployment, so you lose jobs. So obviously they're not going to be happy. So these kind of issues surmount. And then there's a lot of questions about decentralization. Since Japan already experienced limited decentralization, it didn't work out. All these promises about Doshusei, it's going to make it great. Doshusei Hiromata Noboru. Nizame no Shimi, it's going to be great. Oh my Kenshi saying Doshusei is great. But actually, there's all these problems. It's going to increase poverty, it's going to increase inequality. So there's two sides to the argument. And I think, generally speaking, people have seen the results of decentralization under Koizumi. And they think that it's going to cause more problems than solve problems. I think there's a lot of pessimism. I think if you do a survey, most people are not so enthusiastic about more decentralization. Okay, well. We have 2 minutes. So these are some comments about Doshusei. Some people, like the governor of Miyagi, saying we have to have more decentralization. We have to have more self-responsibility. Jikosekkinin, municipalities are too dependent on the central government. And then there are others who say if you do that, it's going to be a winner-take-all, or I should say, competition will mean there'll be losers and there'll be too many losers. It's a difficult balance. So that's that. I think you may have had too much information here, as usual. But to think about, how can we balance? Decentralization is not necessarily a cure-all, but centralization, on the other hand, also has lots of problems. So how can we balance it? And then in the context, you have all these major problems of depopulation in rural areas, lack of economic opportunities, inequalities, right? Okay, so I think that's enough for today. If you have any questions on this? Yes? Yeah.
It's the party, the government is pressing much.
It's still a proposal stage, and the LDP has made promises that it will try and make this legislation. And of course, Ishin no Kai, or Ishin no To, in Osaka is very much in favor of Doshusei. But I think, generally speaking, within the LDP, there's a lot of uncertainty, and it has come down. It has fallen off the radar. People aren't talking about it much. Okay, good. So I will upload the readings for this and for next week on Classes. So please check. Okay. And I'll see you next week.